think we're live. You have an opening niggin for us?
The niggin,
I don't know. Like maybe save one of those, the ones that we discussed. Maybe save those. Okay. You have something to open with? You got something? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. From Brooklyn Heights, right? You were here at Chav Chesivin. You're back. I know, you're talking to me. Good Yontif.
Good Yontif.
Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. Chag Geula. Okay, first of all, we want to welcome two groups that I know about. Maybe it could be a third group that just came in, but I know that the staff of, is it called Gan Yisrael? Is that the name of it? Yeah, I see the shirts. Yeah, the yellow shirts, yellow Gan Yisrael shirts are, wait, hold on, let me make sure I get it right, are from Roslyn. You can cheer for yourselves. You're not on camera, it's okay. And the blue Gan Yisrael shirt from Greenwich, Connecticut. Oh, wow, that was much louder. Okay, Camp Spirit. And was there another group that came in? From CGI Melville. Okay, excellent. There are different various groups coming in. It's the summer. And one of the things that happens in the summer is summer camp. And we have incredible staff, young people who have dedicated their summer to giving a positive Jewish experience to children. And that's really the theme, or one of the big themes of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, which, in case people don't know, is the anniversary of the liberation from imprisonment of the previous Rebbe. And he was imprisoned for his heroic efforts to sustain and even enlarge Jewish life, even under the darkest days of Stalinist oppression. And specifically, and this is what got him in trouble, was promoting Jewish education among youth. So it's very appropriate, and I'm very honored and humbled to have people who are devoting their summer to the Jewish youth here with us. So thank you for making this Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz gathering all the more meaningful. And of course, we're at the SoulWords house, just a half a block from the Ohel. Okay, what we're going to do tonight, Hashem should help us. I'm going to try to avoid getting too deep, like concepts or anything. I'm just going to tell the story. I'm going to tell the history. And my dear friend, Reb Eli, is going to also tell the story, but in his own way, in his own language, in the language of the soul, which is Nigina, which is Hasidic melody. Okay. You may notice, because I have my transparent Ständer, that, what? Translucent? Is it translucent? Translucent? Okay. It's definitely not opaque. That's certainly so. You may notice that here on my lovely lucite Ständer, I have a book. It's called Our Days, and the subtitle is A Journey Through the Chabad Calendar. And what it is, it goes through all of the significant dates of the year in the Chabad tradition. And it gives us the background, the history, and also how those days were observed by the Rebbe. And this is a publication, a wonderful 2-volume publication from the Chassidische Daher magazine. And I heavily relied upon this new publication in preparing tonight's presentation. So let's begin like this. Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th day of the month of Tammuz, as we mentioned, is the anniversary of the previous Rebbe's liberation from imprisonment in 1927. But before that, it was his birthday. I mean, it continues to be his birthday. It's the day he was born. Tov Reish Mem, 1880. 5640, which is 1880. So before we tell the story of the imprisonment and the liberation, we'll tell a little bit of the birth and the childhood of the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe was born, as we said, Yud Beis Tammuz. The year that he was born, that was a Monday. What do you know? Monday, when Yud Beis Tammuz is Monday, do you know what happens? Shabbos becomes Yud Zayin Tammuz, Shavasar B'Tammuz, which is famous as a fast day. But when it falls on Shabbos, it's a Nidche, it gets pushed off. So, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Shalom Zachar was on Yud Zayin Tammuz, but pushed off, because when the fast falls on Shabbos, it gets pushed off to Sunday. At the Frierdiker Rebbe's bris, it's said that he was crying, as many children cry at their bris. And his grandfather, the Rebbe Maharash, the 4th Rebbe of Chabad, was comforting him and saying to him, "Why are you crying? You will grow up one day, and you will be a Rebbe, and you will explain Chassidus very clearly." The Frierdiker Rebbe grew up as the only child, only son, only child of his parents, the Rebbe Rashab, who was the 5th Rebbe of Chabad, and his Rebbetzin Stern Sora. It's known that when the Frierdiker Rebbe was a child, he actually would sleep in a room where the Rebbe Rashab, where his father would often study. And there's a story that once the Rebbe Rashab was learning with his chavrusa. Who was his chavrusa in this particular instance? Was a chassid by the name of Reb Yankiv Mordechai, who is also known as the famous Paltover Rav. Oh, you sing that one. I heard you at Kinnis HaShluchim sing Paltover Nigum. Maybe we'll cue that one up, maybe. Sure. I just came to... Sometimes I get inspired in the moment, yeah. So they were learning together, and Yankiv Mordechai pointed out how sweet and pure the Frierdiker Rebbe looked as a little child. And the Rebbe Rashab said he felt an enormous love, like a father feels for a child. And he wanted to go over and kiss him. And he said what he did at that moment is he channeled the love that he had for his child. Instead of a kiss, he channeled it into a mimer, a Chassidic discourse, called Morabu Maisecha. How wondrous, how many are your works? Ostensibly, one of those works of Hashem, one of those great miracles that this father was lauding, was the miracle of his child, his dear child. At any rate, the Rebbe Rashab then put the mimer away, and then 8 years later, after the incident, he gave the mimer to the Frierdiker Rebbe, but he didn't tell him what it was. Frierdiker Rebbe was 12 years old. He gave him the mimer, and he just gave it to him as a gift. And then it was only 4 years after that, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was 16, that the Rebbe Rashab revealed to him the story, and that's how we know the story. As a child, the Rebbe Rashab encouraged the Frierdiker Rebbe to learn Mishnayos Baal Peh. And he became quite proficient, even at a very young age, in memorizing the words of Mishnah. The Frierdiker Rebbe is, yeah, sure. Just slide it over here. Okay. Inconspicuous, incognito. Okay, thank you. The Frierdiker Rebbe's proficiency in memorizing Mishnayos actually came to great use during a particular incident of his childhood. Trivia question. How many, and nothing is trivial about the Rebbeim, but fun fact, quiz question. How many times was the Frierdiker Rebbe imprisoned? How many imprisonments did he have? It's an odd number. 7. And he wrote that he was imprisoned 7 times. The last time was the one that we're celebrating the release of tonight. The first time is the story I'm about to tell you right now. And he also mentioned that there were 5 imprisonments under the Tsar and 2 under the communists, in case you're keeping score. So what's the story of his first imprisonment? He was 11 years old. He had just turned 11. It was that summer that he turned 11. And his father, the Rebbe Rashab, used to give him money for memorizing Mishnayos. And what did he do with the money? You know, what does an 11-year-old do with money? Buy toys, buy candy. But the Frierdiker Rebbe took his money and he made a gamach. He made a free loan society. And particularly Jewish businessmen who were not so successful. They didn't have a lot of capital. So they depended on having some money to go to the market and buy some merchandise and then turn around and sell that at a meager profit margin. And so they needed money every day to be able to do their business. And so the Frierdiker Rebbe that was one of the main uses of the Free Loan Society. Particularly, there was a chassid named Reb David. And so the 11-year-old Frierdiker Rebbe was in the market and he was talking to Reb David. And all of a sudden, a police officer came over, and he started harassing Reb David. And the Frierdiker Rebbe never wanted to back down or shy away, especially in the face of oppression, especially in the face of injustice. He stood up to the policeman. He called him a drunk. He said, well, why are you bothering this person, this innocent person? And there were no body cameras, so the policeman arrested the Frierdiker Rebbe and said, he tore my badge. He tore my badge, and he arrested him, and he brought this little 11-year-old kid down to prison. He put him in jail. So he's sitting in jail, and what's he supposed to do there? He says, I know all of these words of Mishnah by heart. I shouldn't waste time. So he was reciting the holy words of Mishnah by heart while he was in prison. And interestingly, while he was there, he heard like groaning or moaning. He wasn't exactly sure what it was. It was kind of an eerie sound coming from like a dark corner of the jail. And then eventually he discovered it was a calf. It was a little cow, baby cow. And when he was finally released, his uncle, Reza, Reb Zalman Aaron, had political connections. The Rebbe Rashab had a brother, an older brother, Reb Zalman Aaron. So he got the Frierdiker Rebbe released, and in fact, they had to apologize. We're sorry, we didn't know you were Reb Zalman Aaron's nephew. And then when he was released, he said, by the way, I saw a little cow in the cell. And they put 2 and 2 together. They realized that this same police officer who had dragged the Frierdiker Rebbe into jail was accusing David, that same Reb David, of having stolen a cow, which was not true. Actually, the cop stole the cow and was hiding it in the jail for himself. And his whole plot became exposed, and he was brought to justice. afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe was speaking to his father, to the Rebbe Rashab, about his experience. And his father said to him, from this story, you learned a valuable lesson of the advantage, Yisuna Adam ala Behema, the advantage of a human being over an animal. You had holy words of Torah to recite because you'd memorized them. You'd spent your youth memorizing these words, and you were in jail where you had no books, you had nothing to read, you had nothing productive to do, but you were able to be productive because you had those words memorized, and you were able to study Torah even in that place. And if you hadn't had that ability, then what would be the big difference between you and that little calf? But because you had spent your youth learning the holy words of Torah and memorizing them, you were able to not be just another creature there in that prison. You were a full human being. So that was the Frierdiker Rebbe's first imprisonment. Tell you a little bit more about the Frierdiker Rebbe's youth. He started putting on tefillin 2 years before his bar mitzvah in secret. Yeah, in public, he did what is the normal custom. 2 months before the bar mitzvah, he started putting on tefillin in public. And at his bar mitzvah, the Rebbe Rashab said various maimarim. In fact, there were 7 days, like a Sheva Brachas, like when a chassan and kala get married, you have 7 days of wedding festivals. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe turned 13, his bar mitzvah was a whole week of celebration. And one of the maimarim that the Rebbe Rashab said was the words. It started with the words that the Rebbe Rashab, that King David, that David HaMelech said to his son, to Shlomo HaMelech, to King Solomon, you should strengthen yourself and become a man, be a man. And that was one of the maimarim that Rebbe Rashab said in connection with the Frierdiker Rebbe's bar mitzvah. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. I mentioned, I don't know if everyone heard this earlier when I welcomed some of the camp staff who are here. And if you're tuning in to the live stream, pointing to the camera, hi, live stream people. If you're tuning, maybe you're tuning in late. A lot of our crowd here are camp staff. They devoted their summer to helping Jewish children have a positive Jewish experience. So I want to tell you a little story in connection with this event. What's up, Yisrael? Well, my mic is good. You're playing with the cords makes me nervous. Maybe I kicked something or unplugged something. It's all good. Someone wrote on the live stream, by the way, in the YouTube chat, very interested in the story tonight. Can't lie, at least partly because it's my birthday, too. Glad there's live music. Okay, so happy birthday to you as well. That's very special. Your birthday is the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday. It's amazing. And I don't know what that person's name is. I just see the YouTube handle. Okay. So here's a story. 1968, Rabbi Moshe Feller, may he be well, shliach to Minnesota, was in the Catskills at a BBYO camp, B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, not a religious organization. And meaning to say these kids there were not from religious homes, they were not observant or even very traditional at all. And somehow he was able to be a camp rabbi or a visiting rabbi, scholar in residence, some type of arrangement like that. And actually he said that one of the things he was doing there is he was learning with the staff, with the counselors. And he said there were a group of guys who sort of, not all of them, but a group of them who sort of connected with him and were very interested in learning with him. And so it was Yud Beis Tammuz. And so he says, you know, what am I going to do? Yud Beis Tammuz, I'm going to talk to them about the story. I'm going to tell them about the Frierdiker Rebbe, about his imprisonment and his courage. And The whole story. So he tells them today is Yud Beis Tammuz, 12th day, the Hebrew month of Tammuz. This is the anniversary of the previous Rebbe's liberation. And he told them all about the story. They were very inspired. And he said, Rabbi Feller said, and on this date, which is a very important date, our Rebbe always has a Farbrengen. Well, they didn't know what that was, so he had to explain. It's a gathering, and it's in 770, the Lubavitch World Headquarters in Crown Heights, and it's a very special thing. And in fact, I just want to let you know, I'm going to take the bus to Brooklyn, and I'm going to go to the Rebbe's Farbrengen, and then I'm going to come right back, and I'm going to be with you guys again. So one of the boys, one of the counselors, says to Rabbi Feller, well, how can you leave us and go to the Farbrengen in Brooklyn? You need the Farbrengen with us here. Now, I don't have to tell you guys. Any chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe hears that and knows there's no way you turn that down. And he was very conflicted because obviously, where did he want to be for Yud Beis Tammuz? He wanted to be by the Rebbe's Farbrengen, of course. But how is he going to show his face in front of the Rebbe when these teenage kids, these boys who are not from religious homes and who are getting closer to Yiddishkeit and to Chassidishkeit, and they're asking for a Farbrengen? What's he going to do? Is he going to say no? So it's very hard for him, but he held himself back, and he stayed away from the Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengen by the Rebbe, and he made a Farbrengen for the staff there at the BBYO camp. Okay. So, remember I told you the year the Frierdiker Rebbe was born, Yud Beis Tammuz was a Monday, and I told you his Shalom Zachar was on every Shalom Zachar was on Shabbos, but Shalom Zachar on a Shabbos was Shiva Asar B'Tammuz Nidche, right? Okay. So this year, 1968, when this story takes place, Yud Beis Tammuz was also on a Monday. The fast of Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was a Nidche, was pushed off, so it was a Sunday. So what Rabbi Feller did is, after Shabbos, then he went to Brooklyn on Sunday, on the fast day, and then he stayed over one more day. He stayed until Monday. And on Monday, Rabbi Binyamin Klein, one of the Rebbe's secretaries, says to Rabbi Feller, stick around because the Rebbe wants to see you. And he said, actually, the Rebbe called in 3 shluchim. Rabbi Feller, Rabbi Kunin from California, and Rabbi Groner from Australia. And they each had yechidus. And there was this very unusual thing, unprecedented, a 1 in the afternoon Farbrengen on, well, what's the date? Yud Tes Tammuz, right? Because Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was Shabbos. It was Nidche, was pushed off. The fast day was Sunday, which was Yud Ches. So this story is Monday, Yud Tes. Okay. So it's Yud Tes Tammuz. 1 p.m. Farbrengen, short little Farbrengen, about an hour long. At the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said a mimer. The Dibur HaMaschil, the opening words of the mimer was V'chazakto v'yisa le'ish, which you'll recognize as one of the Maimorim that we mentioned earlier that the Rebbe Rashab said in conjunction with the Frierdiker Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah. Many of the Maimorim of the Rebbe, if not most of them, are based on reiterations of Maimorim of the previous Rebbe. And after the Farbrengen, the short little Farbrengen, there was this Yechidus. And Rabbi Feller came in, and he hadn't told the Rebbe the story about BBYO. But he comes in, and the Rebbe says to him, Hiyos as du hast sich eingehalten, because you held yourself back von zukommen da, Yud Beis Tammuz, from coming here on Yud Beis Tammuz, hab ich for dir verendigt dem Maimer. For you, I said this Maimer, this continuation of the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer. And then the Rebbe proceeded to explain what I had mentioned earlier, that the Frierdiker Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah was celebrated for 7 whole days, like the Sheva Brachas of a wedding, and that this was one of the Maimorim. And if you do the math, so that date, Yud Tes Tammuz, the 19th day of Tammuz, was the 7th day coming out of Yud Beis Tammuz. So we're going to talk a lot about the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice of the previous Rebbe in Soviet Russia, the real risk to life and limb that he and his Chassidim were able to endure with courage and with dignity. But I also want to mention the Mesiras Nefesh of Dor HaShvi, of our generation, that a young person puts aside their own desires and dedicates themselves to Jewish education, to Jewish youth. And I want you to know, those who are doing this summer, all of you who are in camp, it's not easy. It's not easy. But you're doing something that is so precious to the Rebbe, so dear and cherished. And it is a sacrifice. But it's well worth it. And my bracha for you, for whatever it's worth, you know that there will be peiros, there will be fruit from your labor. But my bracha to you is, that's not my bracha, that's a haftacha. You know that there's going to be results. My bracha to you, my birkas hadyet, is that you should get to see a little bit of the nachas. You should get to know a little bit of the effect he had. What's up, Yisrael? Every time you come up here, I get nervous. What? I should be? Why? Okay, fine. You're just waiting for Ellie to start singing? Thank you. This is my son. He has incredible, he's hanging on every word from his father. He wants Ellie to sing. Okay, at any rate.
He just wants me to test the mic. It's working. It's working.
Uh-huh. Okay. And hey,
mystery settled.
Remember that nigga that I mentioned before?
Yes.
Remember Yankiv Mordcha, the Poltavarov? You still know that one?
Yeah, I still know it.
Okay. You want to pull that one out?
Tidido yena na yena na yena ya yidima yo. Oh yena na yena na yena ya yidima yo. Oh yena tidida oh ya yidima yo. Dido yena na yena na yena yidima yido. Oh yena na yena na yena yidima yido. Dido yena dida oh yidima yido. Dida ya oh ya na da da ya mama. Dida ya oh ya la da ya la da ya la da. Dida ya dido ya na da da ya dido ya na dida oh ya yidima yo. Dido ya na na ya na na ya na oh ya na ya yidima yo. Nira ya na yo yidima yo. Dido ya na ya yidima yo. Oh ya na mama yidima yo. Oh, yeah, no. Right in my shot. Oh, yidam, dirai, ayam, ayam. Oh, yeah, nada, yamam. Dirai, ayam, ayam, ayam. Oh, nada, 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 oh, yeah, nada, dum, yidam. Oh, yeah, nam.
Mike
It's
sounds good.
Poltavnik.
Frierdiker Rebbe, thank you for always being
Absolutely.
spontaneous, on the fly. Good sport. In the flow state. Appreciate it. Let's talk about the imprisonment of the Frierdiker Rebbe. A little bit of background. So I mentioned it was 1927. Tafresh Pei Zion. So this happened in the summer. I mean, the summer right now. The Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested Tes Vav Sivan, the 15th day of Sivan, and was finally released, like we mentioned, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, so just short of a month of imprisonment. But I want to go back half a year or so before, a little bit more than half a year, to the Rosh Hashanah of that year. There's actually a Sikha, that's why I have this Likutei Sichos Chelek Chof Gimel here. There's a Sikha in Chelek Chof Gimel Likutei Sichos, page 157. It's a Sikha with the title Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. And the beginning of the Sikha, the Rebbe quotes what the Frierdiker Rebbe himself wrote about himself, that the Rosh Hashanah Maimarim, it's a customary thing, a Rebbe will say Maimarim on Rosh Hashanah. So the Rosh Hashanah Maimarim of Taf Reish Pei Zion, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said, he said that in the Maimer, he spoke about the Baal Shem Tov's approach to Hashgacha Pratis. You know, there are different schools of thought about divine providence. And the Baal Shem Tov has the most radical approach to divine providence. The Baal Shem Tov says that Hashgacha Pratis, individualized supervision, is on every single level of the creation, even down to inanimate objects. Every detail is meticulously orchestrated by design, actively by the Creator. And that's the Baal Shem Tov's approach. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that in the Rosh Hashanah Maimarim of that year, he mentioned this idea about the Baal Shem Tov's approach to Hashgacha Pratis, to divine providence. And he said that afterwards it was strange that he thought it's strange that he had even mentioned it, because it was not the point of the Maimer. It was kind of off topic, sort of just came up. And in fact, interestingly enough, if you look at the printed version, the edited printed version of that Maimer, of that discourse, the part where the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about the Baal Shem Tov's approach to Hashgacha Pratis is not there. It was edited out precisely because, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said, it wasn't really on point. It was like it was off topic. So that's Rosh Hashanah. Later on, what are you talking, 9 months later, in the summer, right? Tishrei, Cheshvan, we'll count it out. Kislev, Tevis. I don't know if it was an Iber, I have to go find out. Shvat, at least one on there. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Okay, Tammuz. So you're talking about 9-10 months later. The Frierdiker Rebbe says that when he was arrested and he was subjected to the type of treatment that the communists subjected him to, which was, they were masters of manipulation. That was their whole point, was to break people, to intimidate people, It was psychological warfare. And they tried to break him. Frierdiker Rebbe said upon reflection after his release that if it had not been for the fact that on Rosh Hashanah already, 10 months earlier, he'd been thinking about the Baal Shem Tov's approach to divine providence, he would not have been able to endure his imprisonment. Because what got him through the imprisonment was the ability to constantly be aware that Hashem is running the show, not these people, not his captors. They are not in charge. Hashem is in charge, and that literally every detail of his imprisonment is divinely orchestrated. And it was that crystal clear faith at every moment of his imprisonment that allowed him to go through it with courage and with dignity and peace of mind. And they couldn't rattle him. They couldn't. They tried. They couldn't. But like I said, I'm not here to talk about deep ideas. I want to tell you stories. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested. What day did I say? Date? Tes Vav Sivan, 15th of Sivan. It was midnight. And they came to his house. He had been granting yechidus, personal audiences, all night. He was very tired. He'd been meeting one-on-one. That's something that a Rebbe does, meet one-on-one with people. By the way, where was the Frierdiker Rebbe living at this time? Leningrad. It was called Leningrad by that time. It used to be called, or Peterburg in Yiddish, which was the imperial capital. That's the Tsarist capital. The communists changed the capital to Moscow. And then they changed Peterburg to Leningrad, named after Lenin. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was living in Leningrad. You know that after the Frierdiker Rebbe left Lubavitch, they went to Rostov during World War I. And then eventually went to Leningrad. And in fact, for a certain period of time, even under communism, it wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't that bad, it was bad, but they were able to function. They had, for instance, they had Fabrengens. There was a shul in the Frierdiker Rebbe's house. They were able to daven. There was a certain amount of freedom. Obviously, the underground chadorim, the underground schools for children. I mentioned earlier, the thing that communists were really sticklers about was they officially had freedom of religion, and they were very proud of the fact they had freedom of religion, but don't indoctrinate the children. So that was their big beef. Don't teach the children Yiddishkeit. So that was something that had to be done clandestinely in secret. But a lot of the things they were doing was not in secret, at least to a certain point. What happened is that unfortunately there was the Jewish division of the GPU, which later is known as the KGB, the Yevtzaktia, the Jewish division, and these were Jews who joined the communists, and they were a real thorn in the side of the Jewish community, and they would prove their loyalty to the communists by being especially hateful toward religion and religious Jews. They were not very powerful for a while, but without getting into all the politics of the 1920s, something happened where they were kind of like unofficial for a while, and then they were brought in and made official. They were given a bunch of power. Later on, they were all executed, by the way. The communists never really cared for them. But for a few years, they had a run where they were given a lot of authority, and that's when it became a nightmare. And many Chassidim were arrested before the Frierdiker was arrested. Chanya Morozov was arrested. The Gorodetskys were arrested. Who else in that same period of time? There were many arrests even before the Frierdiker was arrested. So they came to his house. It was midnight. And it's interesting. The Frierdiker's daughters were there. His 3 daughters. And the 2 members of the Yevtzaktia who came to arrest the Frierdiker were actually not just of Jewish extraction, but they were descended from Chassidim. I shouldn't even say descended from Chassidim. I'll talk about it later, but one of the 2 had a father who was still actively a chassid and would learn Chassidus by Zalman Moshe in Neville, which we'll talk about that. I'll explain what that even means. But Nachmanson and Lulov. Those were their names. So they came in, and obviously they were trying to intimidate. That was their whole MO, was to intimidate. And they asked the Frierdiker Rebbe's daughters, to what party do you belong? Now, you know what they want to hear, the Communist Party. And I want to tell you what they said, and I think we should all remember this. Every chassid should remember this. Rebbe Chaim Mushka said, I belong to my father's party. So if anyone asks you, have you registered to vote? Which party do you belong to? I belong to the Rebbe's party. That's my party. That's my party, the Rebbe's party. Rebbe Stern Asada, the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother, was there, and she was hysterical. She was crying. She said, why are you doing this to my son? All he does is help people. He does nothing for himself. Leave him alone. And she even pleaded with them. She said, take me. She was an elderly woman already at the time. She said, take me. It's interesting, Frierdiker Rebbe says that the one moment he saw maybe a little bit of humanity in Nachmanson, he said Lulav was much more crass. Nachmanson was half a mensch. The one moment when he saw a little bit of compassion was that moment when the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Stern Asada, was crying. And Nachmanson told the Frierdiker Rebbe, take her to the other room and calm her down. And he said he didn't say it in a snide way. He said it in a way like he seemed like he was somewhat legitimately concerned. Of course, the Frierdiker Rebbe also writes in his diary that later on, when they got to Spalerka, to the prison, it completely changed and Nachmanson became a monster. And a lot of promises that were made during the arrest. The arrest took a long time. It was dragged out for a long time. Took many hours. And I'll tell you about the hashgacha pratis of that, about the arrest taking so long. They wanted, Spalerka prison was only a few blocks away from the Frierdiker Rebbe's house. They wanted him to walk. He said he wasn't well, he needed a van. And for whatever reason, it took them a long time to get the van. It actually took hours. They didn't bring him out, I think, until about 2 a.m. So during the 2 hours of delay, it was supposed to be chick-chock. During the 2-hour delay, the Rebbe, our Rebbe, who was in Leningrad, ran to Chaim Lieberman's house, that was the Frierdiker Rebbe's secretary, and started confiscating documents that would have been incriminating, lists of Chassidim who were involved in underground activities. And all of that was able to happen because of the delay. There were promises made, like I mentioned, the Frierdiker Rebbe insisted that he should be able to bring his talis and tefillin, and that they should agree that he could, and he mentioned that under the new government, meaning under the communists, there's supposed to be religious freedom. And they said, of course, we wouldn't interfere with your religious freedom. Of course, you can bring your religious articles. And then they confiscated it from him when he was actually admitted into the prison. Frierdiker Rebbe, he made a hunger strike. He didn't eat for 3 days because he insisted that they return his talis and tefillin to him. At any rate, eventually they put him in the van and they drove him to the prison. At that point, Chassidim all knew what was going on. The main way that they knew was actually that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, came to the Frierdiker Rebbe's house and saw that it looked strange, like something looked strange. There was the lights were on, too much activity, it was so late. And he didn't come inside. He knew there was something wrong about whatever was going on inside. So he actually walked around to a window, and his betrothed, his future wife, the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, opened up the window and said, Schneerson, we have guests. And the Rebbe understood very well what that meant, who those guests were and what type of business they were there for. So that's how Chassidim began to find out what was happening. Interesting, one of the Chassidim who was there and writes a diary about this episode. He says that the Chassidim were spying to see what was happening, and the way that they were incognito, the way they were undercover, is they would stumble around in the street like drunks, pretending to be drunk. And at each corner of each block, as the van that the Frierdiker Rebbe was being brought to Spalerka, to the prison, they would pass. Nachmanson and Lulav would actually comment and say, "Look at these Hasidic Jews who are stumbling around drunk." But really they were spying. They were undercover. They wanted to see at each corner what was happening. Meanwhile, there was a whole debate what type of channels they should use to try to secure the Frierdiker Rebbe's release. First and foremost were spiritual channels, and I just want everyone to know, especially because we are half a block away from the aisle right now, the main instruction the Frierdiker Rebbe gave when he was arrested, before he was taken away, was that shluchim, emissaries, should go to Hadich, Nezhin, Lubavitch, and Rostov. Those are respectively, the locations of the resting place of the Rebbeim. Hadich is the Alter Rebbe, Nezhin is the Mittler Rebbe, Lubavitch is the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Maharash, and Rostov is the Rebbe Rashab. But a pan should be brought to the oil of each Rebbe. And that was the primary channel or channels that were pursued. But then B'derech HaTava, in natural means, down to earth means what was supposed to be done. There was quite a bit of confusion. They were not sure what they should do because a lot of the things that went on then had to be done quietly. You had to be careful not to upset the wrong people. The people in charge had very fragile egos, and if they felt they were being publicly ridiculed, then they could get even more spiteful or more vengeful. So there were different debates. What do we do? Because there was some infighting in the communist infrastructure. This was Leningrad, so there was the Leningrad office of the GPU, but then there was the Moscow office. So then they thought maybe we should go appeal to the Moscow office, but no, then the Leningrad office will get really mad at us that we got them in trouble. And so it went back and forth like this for quite a bit of time. And also, they were trying to ascertain the Frierdiker Rebbe's status. They weren't even sure, if he was still living. They didn't know what his situation was. I'll tell you, one of the ways that they actually ended up getting inside information about the Frierdiker Rebbe's well-being. So I mentioned to you, remember I said earlier that Nachmanson, actually his father, was a chassid in Neville, and he was learning chassidus with Zalman Moshe. I'm talking about Zalman Moshe Yitzchaki, who, from the Drizzen family is from Zalman Moshe. His son-in-law was Avram Mayor. He didn't have sons. He had a son-in-law, Avram Mayor, Drizzen. So Zalman Moshe was one of the mashpiyim in Neville. He used to give a chassidus shir, maybe more than one, but this Nachmanson, his father still lived in Neville, and he learned chassidus by Zalman Moshe. So they sent a chassid by the name of Zalman Duchman. I don't mean my friend Zalman Duchman from Keilah Chabad, but his namesake, the author of the Shema Eisen, famous book of Hasidic stories. In fact, some of the details I'm telling you actually are from that book. So Zalman Duchman was sent from Leningrad. He was living in Leningrad at that time. It was before he moved to Samarkand. So he went from Leningrad to Neville, and he actually went to Nachmanson's father and said, "Look, your son, your son is a communist, and he actually arrested the Rebbe, and we need to get inside information. Will you come back with me to Leningrad?" He didn't want to go, but they called him. I think that means on the telephone. They called him, some chassidim from Leningrad, and they convinced him to come. And actually, that's how they got a lot of the inside information. He would find out from his son, and he would leak the information to Zalman Duchman, who would tell the chassidim. So they're working on various different diplomatic channels. There was a lot of international pressure. The decision was made. Let me backtrack. They weren't sure how public to be. Remember, I mentioned they weren't sure how public to be about it or not. Sometimes it's better to put pressure privately, because if you make it public, it can make it even worse. When the information was finally leaked, it took a few days, but they found out that the sentence was a death sentence. Then they said, we have nothing to lose. So at that point, they went public, and they started to use the channels of international diplomacy. And it became world news within a few days. Newspapers in every country where there was a Jewish community were writing about this story about the arrest of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Eventually, the sentence, because of the pressure, was commuted. It was not acquitted, but they were able to change the sentence from a death sentence to exile in a place called Kostroma, which is they say it's 900 kilometers from Leningrad, but I don't know what kilometers are. I know freedom units, so somebody can pull up your calculator on your phone and let me know how many miles that is. But in 1927, it was a 24-hour train ride. I don't think that means a 24-hour train ride going directly. I think probably it was indirect. I think there were probably stops. But it took 24 hours by way of train from Leningrad to Kostroma. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was released, meaning not released to go free, but sent into exile, was Gimel Tammuz. Now, I'll tell you an interesting behind the scenes about Gimel Tammuz. Now, of course, we know Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe's Yortzeit. But I'll tell you an interesting behind the scenes. Again, Neville, mentioning a lot about Neville here. But there was an argument in Neville whether or not that the Chassidim should say L'chaim on Gimel Tammuz. I'm saying at the time when it was happening. Because the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, Tes Vav Sivan. So you're talking about 2.5 weeks later, and now he's released from Spellerka prison. Yeah, he's sent into exile, but that's a lot better than still being in prison, and it's better than the death sentence. So there was a debate. Shmuel Levittin is the one who says that he and Zalman Moshe, the aforementioned Zalman Moshe, said that this is worthy of saying L'chaim. And Meir Simcha Chaim said no. It's not yet time. Until the Frierdiker Rebbe is completely free, you don't say L'chaim. And then after the fact, Reb Shmuel said he felt vindicated because he noticed that years later, for the years afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe would not say Tachnun on Gimel Tammuz. So I said, aha, I was right. That even already Gimel Tammuz, even though it was not a complete Geula, it was a Schalta de Geula, you could already say L'chaim. At any rate, so the Frierdiker Rebbe goes into exile, like I said, 24-hour train ride. And who accompanies him? His right-hand man, but it's not a man, it's a woman. His trusted daughter. His power of attorney, Rebbe Tzimchaya Mushka. She goes with her father into exile. And we know that when the Frierdiker Rebbe was eventually released, when he was told he was completely acquitted, he got the news on Yud Beis Tammuz, but it was a Soviet holiday, so they couldn't process the paperwork. So they said, come back tomorrow and we'll really let you go. So he was released on Yud Gimel Tammuz. And they say that because the Soviets added a holiday, it backfired on them, and we ended up getting a 2-day Yom Tov. Because we have Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. Why is it, you ever ask yourself that question? Why is it Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz? Why is it both days? Because the Frierdiker Rebbe got the news of his release on Yud Beis. But they couldn't process the paperwork because it was a Soviet holiday, so he was released on Yud Gimel. So we got both days as a holiday. And when he got the news that he was released, which was the day also of his birthday, as we mentioned, Yud Beis Tammuz was the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday, which is Mazalei Goiver, the day when his soul is shining bright. So when he got that news, his daughter, Rabbi Chaim Mushke, sang the Hasidic protest song, Nyet Nyet Nikovo. There's no one but God himself. And Ellie, that's called a segue. Caught you off guard?
You're jumping to the end.
Yeah, that was too soon?
No. Oh, no, it's not too soon. Nothing's too soon.
Nothing's too soon. Everything in its time. Yeah. I didn't know that was the finale.
Yeah, that's the finale.
Oh, we're going to play out with that one? Okay, we'll have to do...
No, not all of them.
Okay.
What about the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Niggin?
Yeah, you know what? Let's do... Okay. You want to tell the story about that? Sure. I mean, it's not much of a story, but...
Yeah.
Okay.
Full story.
There's a nigun. It's a chartonov nigun, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Chartonov nigunim are a whole genre of nigunim, but this particular nigun was composed to express the feeling of the Chassidim through the ordeals of the Frierdiker Rebbe's imprisonment. So as far as I understand, you're the musical one, but as far as I understand, the different tenuas of the nigun are supposed to express the confusion, the frustration, the pain, the fear, and then the triumph. Is that, you've heard something like that?
Something like that.
Something like that?
They always had the bitochen that the Rebbe is going to come out. Mm-hmm. But I read that the nigun expresses, like, how could this happen? Mm-hmm. How could Hashem allow this to happen? But there's three parts of the nigun, and each part ends with the melody of triumph.
Sounds triumph.
Yeah, it's great. So it's the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Niggin. I couldn't find it because I told you earlier I was going to bring in the National Library of Israel. I don't know. They took off a bunch of things that were available online, and now it's no longer available online. But in the Gishuri notebooks, was a Jewish historian, musicologist who collected nigunim from all over the world, and he writes. It probably was collected in the 30s or 40s. He writes about this nigun, a nigun chodosh mirussia. Right. He didn't know the name of it. He calls it a new nigun that came from Russia.
Because it was composed at that time.
Yeah. So this is Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz nigun composed by Reb Aaron Charitonov. Oh, yada, yada, oh, yada. Dida ma 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 mo yo yo. Dida ma 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 mo yila do yo. Ma 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 mo yo yo. Oh, yada ma yo yada. Ma 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 mo yo yo. Dida ma 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 mo ila da yo. Dido ila da ma mo ina yo ma 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 mo ila do yo. Dido ma yo ina yo yo. Ma 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 mo ila do. Dido ila da ma mo ina yo ma 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 ida da mo ila do. Dido ila da 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 mo ina yo yo ma 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 yo ila do. Dido ila da yo yo oh ila da yo yo. Ma 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 mo ina da do. Oh ila da ya ida ma ila da ida 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 ma 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 yo ila da ida ila da ida da mo ina ida ida ma 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 ila da mo ila do ida ila da 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 mo ina ida ida ma 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 mo ila do. Ida 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 oh ida ida ida
I heard it.
That's the niggin. You heard it before?
No, I'm saying I heard the
You heard the
triumph. Yeah. Okay. So let me backtrack.
All right.
You felt it was premature when I got to the nyet.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. We could go back. There's plenty of interesting things to talk about. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from Spalerka, before he went to Kostroma, he was able to go home for a few hours. I'll tell you an interesting little episode that took place. He asked the Chassidim, while I was away, for those 2.5 weeks, did you learn Chassidus? Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Let's be honest. Let's be real. In the type of emotional state and mental state that Chassidim were in during those 2.5 weeks, do you think they were learning deep Maimorim? Think they had the presence of mind? No. So they answered honestly, we were saying Tehillim. Okay, Tehillim, when somebody, we say Tehillim also, thank God, in times of joy as well, but we say Tehillim also when we're brokenhearted, when we're crying out to Hashem. So they said honestly, we weren't learning Chassidus, we were saying Tehillim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe did not like that answer. He said to them, this is during the few hours between his release from the prison and boarding the train to go into exile. He says, I wrote my Maimorim until they took away the pencil from me. He's saying in prison. Meaning to say, the value of Chassidus, of the Rebbe's Maimorim. Like, it's very nice you're saying Tehillim, but even at the time, or maybe especially at the time when you feel like life is falling apart, that's when you have to be learning Maimorim. And like I mentioned earlier, that the Frierdiker Rebbe attributed his ability to endure his whole imprisonment to the Maimorim that he had said Rosh Hashanah. During those few hours, the Frierdiker Rebbe then took, remember, he says, I wrote my Maimorim until they took away the pencil. So where were the Maimorim? He brought them out of prison, and he gave the manuscript to the Rebbe, to our Rebbe, to his son-in-law. And the Rebbe was the one who then transmitted the Maimar to the Chassidim. At the train station, at the train platform, there was a mob. And remember, the Frierdiker Rebbe is still a prisoner. He's not in prison. He's going into exile, but he's still not free to go. And yet he spoke with absolute defiance there on the train platform. And he delivered a famous sikha, short sikha, but famous sikha, where he quoted his father, the Rebbe Rashab. By the way, this image that you're seeing here is an image from this time period. It's right after the imprisonment. After the imprisonment, the Frierdiker Rebbe eventually, later that year, left the Soviet Union and went to, you know where the Frierdiker Rebbe went after the Soviet Union? Riga, Latvia. Very good. Which was not part of the Soviet Union at that time. So this picture actually, they say that most likely it's a passport photo. Although the passport, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Soviet passport from that time has never been found, so we're not sure. But they say it's presumably his passport photo from that period. So this is what he looked like at that time. Okay, at any rate, so on the train platform, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who's still technically a prisoner, speaks defiantly, and he speaks to the Chassidim, And he quotes his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and he says that it is only our bodies that were sent into exile, not our souls. And no power, no human power has any control over the Jewish people. It was not by our will that we went into exile. It is not by our will that we will leave exile. It is only by God's will. Al tigu b'mishichai. He said a warning to the Soviets and anyone else who would dare to interfere with Yidden and Yiddishkeit. Do not touch my anointed ones. Hands off. Don't mess. A real defiant message. And this, again, this was still when the Frierdiker Rebbe was a prisoner. This is Gimel Tammuz, when he was released from prison, but still under the he was still a captive, not free to go. Maybe we'll tell you a little bit more about what happened during those, wasn't that long, a little over a week in Kostroma. It's somebody put in the YouTube comments, by the way, 559 miles. Oh, Yechevid put that. Yechevid from Boca. I remember I was speaking in Boca. Am I correct, by the way? You can just write in the chat if I'm correct. Yechevid from Boca. I remember meeting her at a Shabbaton at Rabbi News Shul. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly? Because I meet a lot of people. Just let me know if I'm remembering the right person. Anyway, she wrote 559 miles. Okay. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Kostroma for, from Gimel Tammuz until Yud Gimel Tammuz, so talk about 10 days. He was there for a Shabbos. There were about 100 Jews in that little town. They had a shul. Maybe they had more than one shul, but there was the shul that the Frierdiker Rebbe davened in. They say that his presence was a spectacle. They had never seen a Yid davening all Shabbos, and a crowd was forming. In fact, the Rebbe spoke about it in a sikh, I think, Chof Chesiven. It was for sure Chof Chesiven Fabrengen. I think in the Yuds, maybe it was Tovshin Yud Beis, but the Rebbe described the scene that occurred when the Frierdiker Rebbe was davening all day on Shabbos. Remember, he's a prisoner. Like, remember, the Frierdiker Rebbe was asking the Chassidim, "Were you learning my modem while I was in prison?" They were like, "No, we didn't have the presence of mind to be learning my modem. We were saying Tehillim." And yet the Frierdiker Rebbe is a prisoner, and he's writing my modem, and he's davening at length. So he was davening all Shabbos until late in the afternoon. And the Rebbe tells this story. He says, ad kedei kach, to the extent, like the whole town, even the non-Jews, were coming out to the shul to watch this holy man who was praying all Shabbos long. And even the town priest came to watch, to see what is this unusual spectacle here. The point, again, though, is that even at these times of real danger, the Frierdiker Rebbe had presence of mind. He was unshakable. I'm going to break my rule. I said I'm here to tell stories. It's so much against my nature to not at least put in a little Dvar Torah. You know what they say about the Dvar Torah? They say, how often can a rabbi recycle his material? So it depends on the type of material, because different things people remember different amounts of time. So a good joke, you could only repeat it once every 5 years, because people will remember a good joke for a long time. So you got to wait 5 years, and then you could bring back a good joke. A good story, you can wait a year, and you can bring back people will remember it, but about a year, and then you could bring back. After a year, they'll forget the story, and you could tell the story again. And the Dvar Torah, multiple times in the same speech, because they didn't hear it, they didn't remember it, they didn't want to hear it. Okay, so please indulge me. Last week, our parsha was Chukas. This week, our parsha is Balak. Sometimes they're together, Chukas, Balak. This year, not. It's interesting, at the end of Parshas Chukas, is the war against, you remember who? Og the giant. And Hashem tells Moshe, Al tira, don't be afraid. And Rashi actually has to chime in there because the Jews are winning wars like crazy. Why Al tira, why be afraid? So he says, because Og had a special schus, V'yaveh Apolit, the fugitive came. He was the one who came and told Avram about light. At any rate, he had some history with Moshe's ancestors. The point is, he might have had epis, a schus, some type of a merit that could have stood him in good stead and prevented him from being defeated, at least being defeated easily. So Moshe knew this. He knew Og had a special merit. So Hashem has to come to him and tell him, Al tira, like, don't worry about it. It's good. That's the end of Balak. The end of Chukas. It flows right into the beginning of Balak. The beginning of Balak is Vayar Balak. Balak saw. Vayagar Moav, and his nation, Moav, was afraid. Balak, the king, saw, and the nation was afraid. How did the nation get afraid about what the king saw? So Rashi explains that Balak called a press conference, and he said, everybody, I don't mean to panic, but panic. The Jews are coming. We're all done for, right? And he scared everyone. He was a fearmonger. So the Rebbe juxtaposes the end of Parshas Chukas with the beginning of Parshas Balak. Moshe knew something about Og that could have made him a formidable challenge. He knew, but he kept it to himself, and he projected confidence. That's a leader. Balak knew something, and what did he do? He made everyone else afraid. So the Rebbe says it's hashgacha pratis that those parshas come around the same time as Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, because the Rebbe says, if anyone understood the seriousness. Can I get more seltzer over here? Do we have more seltzer? SoulWords house has cold seltzer, cold water. Oh, thank you. Wow, amazing. Thank you. Don't worry, you're not on camera. You were not on camera. No, yeah, we were careful about it. So the Rebbe says that if anyone understood how serious the threat of the communists really, really was, like how, obviously, in the end, Hashem gets his way, and Mashiach is coming, and it all works out good for us. But on paper, it looked really, really dark. It looked really, really bad. And if anybody understood just how perilous the situation was, it was the Frierdiker Rebbe who understood it. Because he knew what was going on. He had information, he had intelligence, he had people telling him what was going on. He knew the situation. Also, he knew because how a Rebbe knows things. But at any rate, if anyone knew how serious the threat of the communists really, really was, it was the Frierdiker Rebbe. And instead of being afraid and making others afraid, he encouraged his chassidim to be fearless. And that's one of the lessons of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz is fearlessness. That no matter what the situation looks like on paper, no matter what the pundits may be saying, we know that Hashem is with us. In fact, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes about in his diary that when he was in prison, at one point he had like a little twinge of like, I don't want to call it panic, but like he said, he started thinking to himself, here I am in prison. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a father-in-law. I have people who depend on me, a wife and children, not to mention chassidim. People are depending on me, and I'm in prison, and what am I supposed to do? And he says he immediately calmed himself and he said, they are dependent on me, but I and they are dependent on Hashem. And with that, he came back to himself, and he was completely present in that dark place. It didn't get to him. It didn't take him away from his center. And this is one of the lessons of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, is that each of us can find this center within ourselves of fearlessness, that no matter what's going on a personal level or on a communal level, Hashem is in charge, and we're going to be okay. We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be great. It's all going to be good, because Hashgacha Pratis, Hashem is in charge. And there's nothing but Hashem. Yeah. Or in Russian, how would you say that?
You'd say that.
And that's called a segue.
Huh? Yeah.
And this is the song that Rabbi Chaim Mushka sang when they got the news.
Yeah.
Is that smooth?
Yeah. You're getting better at this.
By next Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, it'll be smooth as silk.
The Rebbe told the whole story about Mechol Dvorkin.
With the bottle of mashke.
With the sotke, yeah. Well, interesting. Which shout out to Yossi Kamen for calling me this morning and told me about it. When they heard the news, they went to the office. The Frierdiker Rebbe had to register every week. Once a week, he had to register with the government office. And when they went to register, the guys told him that he's been released, but because it's a holiday, it's a legal holiday, so the office is closed. So when he found out that he took this little sotke, I think I understood correctly. The Rebbe says, Chas v'sholom, he didn't drink it. Chas v'sholom, he didn't drink it. And he took the sotke, and he danced around the house. And the Rebbe explains the whole song and how he says what it means. So it's so funny. The Rebbe asks for somebody to sing it. It's 1965, and nobody knows it. And the Rebbe says, I would sing it, but it's not Simchas Torah, so I can't sing it. So. Yet nikavo krom yevo anavo ay 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 yet nikavo krom yevo anavo ay 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 dere layla my layla in layla my layla my ya la 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 dere layla in layla in layla Kavo from Yevo Anavo ay ay la 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 ya yet Nikavo from Yevo Anavo ay ay la 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 ay la which means Niet nikavo, there is no one. Krom yevo, except for Hashem, except for Him. And that's the only thing to be afraid of. Einin Movadei. That's the message of the song. Einin Movadei. Yet nikavo, krom yevo, anavo, ay ay la 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 la. Yet nikavo, krom yevo, anavo, ay.
Mentioning Rebbe Chaim Mushka also, when she found out the news, she told the Chassidim, but she told them bli pirsum, which means without publication, without publicity. So actually, the first Yud Beis Tammuz was not a big celebration because it was like, keep it quiet. I mean, the communists are still kind of, watching. The first time Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz was celebrated properly was the first anniversary, meaning a year later, and by that time the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Riga, Latvia already. And that's when the Frierdiker Rebbe said the famous words that on this day of my liberation, not only like Oisi Boulevard, not just I was released, but every Jew, and then he says, those who are Shomer Torah mitzvahs, those who keep Torah, and even those, Asher Shem Yisrael Yechunah, that the name of Jew is, Yechunah, you can translate to like, it's almost like, it's called, you can't do justice in English, but it's like people that you can, I guess, technically call Jewish, right? I guess halakhically they're Jewish, meaning to say someone who doesn't necessarily identify as Jewish, maybe even they're hiding the fact that they're Jewish, maybe even, God forbid, a self-hating Jew, and yet the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe from imprisonment is a redemption not just for him, but for every single kind of Jew, because deep down, every Jew is awake to this truth that Eli was singing about of Einid Milvade, that there's nothing but Hashem. And it's our job to reach out with love, and even people who, dare I say, who are, God forbid, the modern-day equivalent of Yevsektia, people who are the modern-day equivalent of card-carrying Communist Party members, we have to reach out and remind them who they are, remind them that they are Jews and they don't belong to any party but the Rebbe's party. Now, I have a little surprise. I'm going to read from Our Days, which I said is from the Chassidische Daher magazine, a wonderful book. I'm going to read here from this page 212. See, Yossi? I hope you're watching, okay? Page 212.
He said he's going to be watching.
He said he's going to be watching? Okay, Yossi, please watch. Page 212. During the Lebanon War in the summer of 57-42, that's 1982, the Rebbe requested that Tanyas be printed in 15 locations across Lebanon, including one specifically within what could be halachically considered as the boundaries of the capital city, Beirut. The Rebbe actually, when he gave the instructions, described it as a place where on a get you would write Beirut, meaning a place that is not near Beirut, but halachically the city of Beirut. You know, the Rebbe was into printing Tanyas everywhere where Jews lived. So historically, there were Jewish communities in Lebanon for centuries, for millennia. So during 1982, when Israel was in Lebanon, the Rebbe said they should print Tanyas, and specifically in Beirut. Despite facing numerous initial obstacles, the Tanyas were successfully printed with the official permission and assistance of the IDF. In a sikha delivered at the Farbrengen of Yud Gimel Tammuz, meaning today, the Rebbe spoke about his insistence that the Israeli army finish their military goals within Beirut and not procrastinate any longer. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about this clearly in case people make any mistake about this and think it's hawkish. The Rebbe said that this will save lives, both Jewish and non-Jewish. For the military operation to be finished effectively, actually, is to save lives, both Jewish and non-Jewish. Okay. Quote, the Israeli forces are already in the city, the Rebbe said, and right here, there's a clear proof. As the Rebbe said these words, he picked up 3 small Tanyas from the table. Here on the table lies a Tanya that was printed in Beirut a few days ago, with enough time for it to arrive here and be on the table during the Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz Farbrengen, the Rebbe said, explaining that this printing was made possible through the direct involvement of the IDF soldiers on the ground in Beirut. It is Yud Beis Tammuz, half a block from the oil, and we are verbringen. And this is a Tanya that was printed in Beirut, Mamish. You can see on the cover it says Beirut. This is one of the Beirut Tanyas right here on our desk. On our desk. Part of our Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz verbringen. And I want to learn from it because it's not just here to hold it. It's to learn from it. And I'm just going to learn a couple of lines from the second volume of Tanya, from Shara Yichud Ve'amunah, which is all about how everything in the world is really Dvar Hashem. It's Hashem speaking the world into being, and there's nothing else. We'll learn a few lines here. From the Beirut Tanya, printed in Beirut. It says in Tehillim, Kuf Yud Tes, behold Hashem, your word stands forever in the heavens. Which words? The words Yehirakia, when Hashem spoke the sky, the firmament into being on the second day of creation. Upirish Baal Shem Tov Zal, the Baal Shem Tov explained, Ki dvorcha shamarti yehirakia b'seichamayim v'gaymer. Your word, Hashem, that you spoke when you said, let there be a sky. Tevis v'oisius elu. These words and these letters, hey, nitzavis v'oim dis la'elam, are continuing to stand b'seichrekia shamayim, inside of the sky, in the heavens, m'lubashis b'seich kol harikiam la'elam lahachiyesam, and is continuing to enliven the skies, the heavens, k'dichsiv v'dvar alakenu yakum la'elam, u'dvar v'chayim mekayamim lo'adchulu, that the words of our God stand forever. And his words, the words of God, are living and existing for all time. Because if these words would depart for even 1 second, and go back to their source, it would all go back not only to the way that it was before it was spoken and no longer exist from here on out, but it would be as if it had never existed even before, because it would lose everything, even its past. Meaning to say that everything in the world is only here because Hashem is actively putting it here at this second. And you can learn more in this holy sefer called Tanya. Doesn't have to be the Beirut Tanya, could be any copy of Tanya, but that's the idea, that everything is exactly as Hashem is making it, and therefore we, as Chassidim, never have to be afraid. We never have to be nervous. We know what our job is. We know what our mission is. And we can do it with courage, and we can do it with dignity and with fearlessness until Mashiach. Okay, Ali, I don't know, what's the appropriate...
Wow.
Did you ever see the Beirut Tanya?
I think so, yeah. Incredible. It's really from Beirut?
Yeah.
Does it say any special Nagunim that they would sing in Beis Tammuz at Farbrengens?
We did Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. We could also, we didn't do the Beinani.
We
didn't do the Beinani yet. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's official Nigun, the Beinani. Okay. Oh,
so what?
Tanya.
Sefer
Beinani. Sefer Shel Beinanim. How do we overlook that?
Terrible.
The question is, how do the counselors not shout that out to us? Okay. Sefer Shel Beinanim.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, Sefer Shel Beinanim, the Nigun of the Beinani. Which is great about these Farbrengens. And thank you to Rabbi Shais that I get to, you let me sing whatever I want, how I want. That's good.
Whatever you like.
The Beinani is a very complicated nigun. And it's so complicated that most people weren't able to grasp it. And it just became simplified. The third part of the nigun. So I'll take this opportunity to try to sing it the correct way, as it was composed. And the Rebbe was actually, you can hear the Rebbe singing on Yud Shvat, Tovshin Yud Zayin.
Okay.
You can hear the Rebbe singing it in just a quick background on the Beinani. Again, the same composer as the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Nigun Aaron Charitonov composed the Nigun, and out of respect, he would sing it for another chassid who was well known for his singing and his being a balmanagin, Rabbi Shais. And he presented him with his new Nigun, and Rabbi Shais kind of didn't exactly give him rave reviews. So he shelved it, meaning, should I take this to Lubavitch? Should I bring it to the Rebbe? And he said no. Or he didn't give his approval. So he shelved it. Once the Baron was Lubavitch, or was by the Rebbe, by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he said, you know what, it's a good nigun. All due respect to the Bosher, but it's a good nigun. I'm going to sing it. And he sang it for the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, this nigun, you can hear the avoid of the Beinani. And that's why it's called the Beinani.
Oh, it wasn't called Beinani before.
That was just a nigun. So this became the nigun. I actually just read earlier that at a Fabrengen in America, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked for a nigun, or asked for somebody to sing, and somebody, I think it was one of the Gordetskis, to sing. And he started singing a nigun. I started singing the Beinani. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, when my younger son-in-law will come, he knows how to sing the Beinani very well. So later, when the Rebbe came to America, they asked the Rebbe to sing the nigun by the Fabrengen. So I'll attempt the original nusach. The original nusach.
Authentic.
The authentic nusach. That really, somebody pointed out to me that you can use, if you watch the Fabrengens, you see the Rebbe is kind of following the nigun, the first two parts. Then by the third part of the nigun, the Rebbe kind of not as involved in the nigun. All right. Yo yinaram oh yinaram oh yamam oh yinaram ay lara yiram amam oh yinaram amam oh yinam Dido yinara yiram amam yiram oh yinaram oh yamam oh yiram ay lara yiram amam yiram amam oh yinam Tirai la rai oh yinam oh yinam amam oh yinam ay la rai oh yinam oh yinam amam oh yinam Yirai la rai oh yinam oh yinam ay la ram oh yinai oh yinam ay la rai oh yinam oh yinam amam yam oh yinam Ramam oh yinam na da 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 ma oh yinam na da 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 ma oh you know da ma ma ya ma ma oh you know na da 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 ma ma you know oh you know da ma 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 oh you know na da 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 ma oh you know na da 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 ma oh you know da da ma 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 oh you know na da 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 oh this is where I lost it. I knew this was gonna happen. No. Try again. Israel, you can edit this out. Oh, you know, na da da dum. Oh, you know, you dum. Ay la da. Oh, you know, oh, you know. Ay la da. Oh, you know, you know, you know. Ay la da, oh you know, you know. Oh you know. That was my attempt on the day.
Beautiful.
Right, thank you. I'll try again. Oh you know, na da 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 da. Oh you know. Na da 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 ma oh you know na da da ma ma oh you know na da 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 oh you know ma all right.
You can see why
I got my point across.
the adapted version caught on. It's tough. It's a tough.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Appreciate the stretch, by the way.
Thank you. Oh,
some people would not even attempt on live stream, and even they can't do it in their sleep. But this is what you're a chassid. You're not here to perform. That's not a concert. This is a farbrengen. This is a real thing.
Absolutely.
It's raw. This is real. That's why I like you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
People might have noticed, by the way, in a lot of our publicity, we mention, we're half a block away from the aisle. There's a reason why we emphasize that. Like, why do we say half a block away? Because we're also, I think we measured, we're 256 amos or something like that. There's a story that a chassid, who was Rabbi Fegelstock from Montreal, came to the Rebbe after Yud Shvat, after the Frierdiker Rebbe's, and he had a conundrum that he wanted to go to the aisle, to the Frierdiker Rebbe's aisle, but the only time he could go was Chol Hamoed. It was the intermediate days of the festival. So he asked the Rebbe what to do, and because you're not supposed to go to a cemetery on Chol Hamoed, on the intermediate days of the festival. So he asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, if you are asking me whether or not it's permissible to visit a cemetery on the intermediate days of the festival, then I'm afraid you already know the answer, which is that's not what we do. However, if what you're asking me is you would like to have yechidus with my father-in-law, just like you did here. They were in 770, so here means in 770. And the only difference is it's now going to take place a few blocks away, meaning the aisle is just, a few blocks away, but it's yechidus. You're going to the Rebbe. Then by all means, Chol Hamoed anytime is a good time. So the Rebbe referred to the aisle as a few blocks away from 770. So it's sort of meaningful to me to say, we're a half a block away from a few blocks away. And we are a half a block away. And it's not we're a half a block away from the aisle. We're half a block away from the Rebbe. And I want to just share with you, as we wrap up here, a Yud Beis Tammuz, actually the first Yud Beis Tammuz after Yud Shvat, after the Frierdiker Rebbe's, that the Rebbe came to the aisle on the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday and Yom HaGeula. And I won't tell the story because actually I have a beautiful video to share with you with Rabbi Herson, Olav Shalom, who just actually passed away this year, sharing his recollection. Actually, he's the only one who has this recollection because he was standing near the Rebbe, and he was the only one who heard this, and he shares his memory of the Rebbe Yud Beis Tammuz of Tafshin Yud, meaning right after the first Yud Beis Tammuz, after the Frierdiker Rebbe's Histalkos. Can we...
And we went to the Yul for Yud Beis Tammuz, and the Rebbe said, "You meine Loshen," and I remembered that when he finished, he was holding the meine Loshen, or maybe he closed it, and he looked to the Matzeva. There was a Matzeva, not an oil. And then he whispered in a way that I doubted that there was another human being that could hear that, because it was so low, but I was so close to him that he whispered, "Agutyon to Rebbe," yeah. And the Rebbe walked back to a few psias, and I remember he broke down. Ze weent, this left me also a tremendous reisha in my mind to the say. And we went to the Yul for Yud Beis Tammuz.
It's back to the beginning.
And the Rebbe said,
anyone who happens to, if you do visit the aisle for Yud Beis Tammuz, whether you go right now or you go anytime during the 48 hours of the Yom Tif, please remember to be mevaser b'suras tovos, to give the Rebbe good news, including the good news that you participated in a Yud Beis Tammuz Verbringen. Okay. Want to play us out? That's what I got. I got nothing else after that, Ali. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for coming. The official program has ended. You don't have to leave, but I have to daven Ma'ariv, so...